So we're working on our computer right now to do some firmware updates, macro installations on our Big 40. So on the Big 40, I'm in the Duet configuration screen of the online manual for Modex. The Duet configuration that you see here at the top of the screen is what we've already configured basically when we connected it to our known network. So once we've gone past that, we can double check that we have connectivity to our machine. When it boots up, it will say, similar to what you see here, Wi-Fi module is connected to access point, and it will give you an IP address. So with the Big 40 that we have set up right now, I'm actually connected right here. So my address is showing up top of the screen. When we want to see when we're connected to the correct machine, this right here will change. Currently right now it says Duet Test. So that tells us that this is the default configuration. The firmware update hasn't been applied to this machine yet. This will be one of the ways of double checking when we're complete and making sure the firmware is installed. So when we come down, we're going to go to System, which is just here on the left side. When you click on System, this is going to give us the option here to upload system files. So if I go back to the Modex screen, or the Modex online manual. All right, so when we come down to our firmware section in the online manual, it's going to state firmware. There are two versions of the interface, version 1.22, which is this one, and version 2.07, which is this one, and this is the one that's currently on our machine. So when you scroll down, you can double check your firmware configuration or settings on this machine here. I already know that I'm running version 2.07. So I'm going to click on the link here to download our firmware. I'm going to download this just to our Big 40 file. Big 40 folder. So once we're complete that, we're going to come to Upload System Files. Go to Modix Big 40. Here's our firmware file. Click on Open. Once that uploads, the Modex will actually prompt you, do you want to install and reboot? Answer yes to that question. So it's just looking at it on the machine, successfully flashed. It's in process of rebooting. It's connected to our Wi-Fi port. And let me refresh this screen. Now, the next step that we're going to go through is we are going to come down and install our printer configuration files. So at this point, you have to be very careful. Do not attempt to home your X, home your Y, home your Z. Your motors are not configured correctly for the board that's controlling the machine. So when we click on this down the Big 40 config file, come back here. I already have it downloaded. So again, we're going to go into the single folder. And this is all the folders that this is all the files we're looking for. Once we've downloaded them, update them, or once we've downloaded them, extract them. Then go on the Duet web interface, go to Settings, General, Upload Files, under 207, go to System, Upload System Files. So go System, click on Upload System Files. You're going to go to your extracted folder under Single. Simply select all the files and click on Open. Because we already have the firmware installed, when it prompts you to install updates, simply answer no. So all of our updated files are now included, are now installed. We go back to our online manual. The next section we're going to do is our macro files. So in the macro files, actually let's do a restart on this Duet right now. I'm going to power cycle this for a second.
Sure.
Going to lose connection on our screen. And once the machine reboots, we will install our macros. Okay, so now we've rebooted, we've reconnected, and you will now notice that since the configuration files are in the machine, it's rebooted, the latest firmware is on it. The update in our upper left corner now says Big 40. So we know that everything is taken up until this point. So if we go back to our online manual, there's a couple of steps here that we have to do for our macro files. There's 3 folders we need to create: calibration general and heaters PID. We're going to create these folders, and we're going to move in and move our macros in the correct locations. To do this, we're going to go on the left side, click on macros. Click and select all the current default macros that are there now. There is not a delete button that you can see on this screen, but if you right click, delete will pop up from the flyout menu. So click on delete, and that will delete all the default macros. They will not work with the modex configuration, so you no longer need them. So let's create our 3 folders: calibration, general, and heaters PID. So now let's go into our calibration folder. We're going to select the button here that states Upload Macro Files. Go back into our file structure. Look for our macro download. And go into Calibration Macros. You can select those 4 files. So in the calibration folder here, you're uploading them into the calibration folder on your modex. Select Open, and we now have the 4 of these in the correct folder. Click on Macros Directory to go up one, click into General, and follow this process for the remaining 2 folders. I don't need the INI file, so I'm just deselecting it. Open to upload those. Again, back to macros, heaters PID, upload, deselecting my desktop.ini, and upload those 4. So we now have all of our 3 major macro subdirectories configured. The only ones we're going to upload now are going to be the root macros. So the root macros in this case are the 4 quickest used macros that you're going to want access to on the very front screen of your Duet Wi-Fi. So I am simply going to select these 4. I'm going to click on Open, and that will produce the last 4 that you require. So the remainder of these steps that Modix has listed on their website simply takes you through the process that I've just done. At this point, I would actually do a fresh reboot on your machine so that it can reread all of the macros and get rid of the old stuff that might still be there. And then we're going to move into our next steps in our build. The next time we see you back here at the laptop, we'll be doing some calibration and test prints. So where we are in the build process right now is we're on the very final steps. We're on the final steps towards adjustment, calibration, bed tilt. So the first step that we're going to want to do in this build process is we're actually going to heat tighten the hot end to the block. When we did the initial assembly, we kind of snugged everything up. At this point in time, we actually want to heat the hot end up, compensate for thermal expansion on the aluminum and the brass, and we want to give it an extra little crank just to make sure that everything is going to be good and tight and you won't get any leakage through it. So at this point, I'm basically setting our hot end temperature to 270 degrees. Before this gets hot, I'm going to go ahead and pull this silicone sock off. So just to get it out of our way, we're going to let our heat come up to temperature. If you have dual extrusions on your machine, you'll obviously have to do this twice. I would recommend just doing one hot end at a time. And the reason why is because you're going to be in fairly close proximity to both heads, and it's very easy to burn yourself when you're doing it. So our hot end is in process of heating up. It's just going to be a minute before we get there. Okay, so our nozzle is up to temperature. I have it set for 270. It's sitting around 272, which is fine. So bear in mind, this is going to be hot. You're going to want to do this process a little quick because your tools are going to get hot very, very quickly. When we're doing this and we tighten up this nozzle, all we're looking for is just a little additional 1/8 of a turn, just enough to heat set it so that we don't have to worry about leakage or anything on these blocks. So I know this is going to block the camera a little bit, but essentially we're going to put our adjustable wrench on this aluminum block. We're going to hold the aluminum block here, and then we're going to use our socket. We're going to come up here on the bottom of the nozzle and give it a little bit of a turn. So everything's set up properly. Get our wrench up here on our block, socket down on the nozzle, and we're just going to give it a little crank. Bear in mind, these nozzles are brass, so they will break fairly easily if you turn on it too much. Once you have the heat tightened done, slide your silicone sock back up over top of your hot end. Make sure it clips over the top, and it should give you just enough time to do that before the heat starts moving through the silicone hot end. So on that note, we are now going to return our hot end back to normal temperature. So we'll put our set point at 210, and then I'm actually going to turn off the hot end because we won't need that hot at this point. Okay, so we're just getting ready for the next part of the process. I'm just homing the Z offset, or homing the bed. So we're going to bring the bed up very, very close to our hot end assembly. For this, we're going to need our printed jig. Now you saw this jig before. Just going to bring this up so you can see it. We did use this before when we were squaring up the gantry. This jig has a dual purpose. There's a hole located in it right here on this rise. This is the hole that we're going to use for calibrating the bltouch. Once we get the rough Z offset set for our bltouch, then we're going to do our bed tilt calibration, and then we're actually going to build our height map.csv, which is basically the height map of our bed. So this is either one of the brackets will do. Both of them are the same. But again, I just want to point out, this is the hole, the one on the rise is the one we're going to be using for this. So we're just going to let that bed come back up into position. We're going to lay our required tools out, which is going to be our 3mm Allen key and our printed part. Okay, so moving forward in the calibration process. The first step of the calibration process is we're going to go into the macro subdirectory under calibration, and we're just simply going to follow through the process of what Modex decides. So in this macro, when you go into calibration, the very first macro you're going to run is called probe calibration. So there's a couple of things you're going to need for this. You're going to need the printed calibration part, or the printed calibration print. This print, you'll notice, has 3 holes in it. The hole we're concerned with in this case is the one in the middle, the one that's on the little rise. So the probe to the bltouch is going to go inside this hole, and we're going to use this when we go set up for our bltouch offset. The first step we want to go through is we want to loosen the 2 screws for the bltouch. We want to let the bltouch fall and let it actually come down and contact the bed. Okay. So that being said, first thing we're going to do, the next thing we're going to do is going to be to hit probe calibration. And it states probe height adjustment, press OK to continue. It says probe deployed, verify it is lower than the nozzle. So we're going to look down below our machine. It is lower than the nozzle. I'm going to snug this for just a minute. Click OK. It's going to go through the homing process. It's going to bring the bed up just till it contacts the probe and triggers it. I have it down a fair bit below the nozzle in this particular case. It's fine, it's not going to affect the process. You'll see as we move through. So, comes back to the middle, and it prompts you on the screen, says loosen the bolts holding the bracket. Place the jig below the bltouch probe and make sure that your probe is in the hole in the middle. So I'm going to reach in here, loosen these bolts again. So my bracket is loose. My bltouch wire is a little tight, but that's okay. Okay, so that's the position that you want this to be in when you start the process. bltouch bracket loose, down well below the head. The calibration jig under the bltouch point with the probe in the hole in the middle. So on the screen it's telling you place the jig beneath the probe and adjust the bltouch height until the nozzle almost touches the bed. This is where I'm going to recommend you grab a piece of paper and you just lay it under your nozzle so you're going to know how close you are. Now, Be very careful with these screens. If you're doing this from the web interface, you can do this from either the screen or you can do it from the web interface. The farmost button on the left interface is 20 millimeters. I recommend doing this from the console on the screen in front of the machine because the first button is 2 millimeters. Be very careful at this point which button you're pushing because the safety mechanisms for this machine that will not allow it to move so far are turned off during this macro. So if you tell this to move 100 millimeters in the, the negative direction, that is what it will do. I'm moving it 2 millimeters at a time until I get close. You'll notice the bltouch bracket is moving as the bed moves. Now, once you get close, come down to the 0.2 millimeter steps. I'm going to move it a couple. See if your paper's touching. Okay. You can see here that the paper is actually has grabbed right now. So I'm going to move it back down the 0.2 so I'm loose. Then I'm going to use the 0.02 to do my final dial. And you'll notice that it is grabbing the paper, but I can still push the paper under the nozzle. That's where I would stop at this point. So click OK. It prompts you on the screen, says tighten the bolts, verify that the probe bracket is vertical. So when we're doing this, we're going to tighten these bolts in. Verify our bracket is still sitting proper. And this is going to be the final position for our bltouch. Once that's done, click the OK button. It will now pull the bed down off the nozzle. You can remove your paper. You can remove your calibration bracket. Have a quick look underneath. Make sure that none of your wires have moved and have come down below the level of the nozzle. The Modix is telling me I can move on to the next step. The next step in this is tilt calibration. So this is where we're going to adjust each one of our 4 ball screws to bring the bed level to the nozzle. So in this process, we're going to start in the middle. Once we finish the middle, we're going to move to all 4 corners and we're going to adjust each one of the ball screws so the nozzle is the same distance away from the bed in all 4 corners. So we start this process by clicking on Tilt Calibration in our macros menu. It will say Tilt Calibration. Press OK to continue. It's going to home and then it will come back to the center and we're going to start the first part in this process. Okay, our screen is telling us center reference point. It says here, place a bracket under the nozzle and adjust the Z height until slight friction can be noticed. Now, they're stating bracket. Honestly, it doesn't matter what you use. I have a hot end adjustable wrench here. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick. Really doesn't matter at this point. All we're doing is we're setting the bed to a unified distance away from the nozzle. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. I'm using it a little long so that I can get my hands in there, not affecting the camera too much. You just want it to be flat, or at least as flat as possible. So I'm going to lay this on the bed just under the nozzle. Very similar to the bltouch adjustment, there are 2 millimeter, 0.2 millimeter, and 0.02 millimeter increment adjustments. When you bring this bed up, you just want to be able to feel a unified distance to where the nozzle is touching the bracket, but you don't want any drag on it. Now bear in mind, I'm putting a piece of metal under my nozzle. It is easy to bend these heat breaks, so do not apply too much force on this. You just want it to touch it enough so you can feel it. I'm going through the same process, bringing it close, and then finally I'm down to the 0.2. Okay, so at that point right there, I am feeling that wrench just touch the nozzle between the nozzle and the bed. So there's where I've got my wrench, and I can clearly feel that the nozzle is caught between the bed and the wrench, but I can still move the wrench without any real force having to be applied. So I'm going to say okay on this. The next part of the process is it's going to tell me to remove the bracket, or the wrench in our case. It says press OK only after the bracket has been removed. I'm going to say OK. It's going to move to the front left corner, and it's going to move to the position where it was from the center. So if your bed corner is high, you may have to move the ball screw down. If your bed corner is low, you may have to move your lead screw up. So in the front left, you can see here, my wrench will not fit under that nozzle. So I'm going to adjust this ball screw. You may find it easier if you actually twist the motor at the very bottom of the lead screw, because the lead screws still have a little bit of packing grease on them, so you may find them a little slippery. So just do your final adjustment on the ball screw until you have the same tension here as what you had in the middle. So we now know this corner and the middle are the same distance away from the nozzle. Click OK. It now warns you, please remove the bracket before clicking OK the second time. And now it will move to the front right corner. Exactly the same process. Again, I'm a little high on this one. Move my ball screw down until I can get the wrench under it, and then manually adjust the ball screw until the same amount of tension is felt as what was felt in the other two locations. So we're going to go through this process for the back two corners, and then we'll be back in the next step. All right, so the last part of that, I finished up in the rear left corner. The last button, I've already removed my bracket. Tells me tilt calibration has been complete. Click OK. I can move on to the next step. So at this point, our probe calibration is done, tilt calibration is done. Now we're going to do the Z offset calibration. So this is going to be the difference in the trigger point of the bltouch to where the end of the nozzle is at the same point. So if we click on Z offset calibration, the menu simply says press OK to continue. It's going to home our bed. Okay. The screen itself is telling me, place a piece of paper under the nozzle and raise the bed until slight friction can be noticed. Going to use our paper here. Again, I would recommend doing this off the screen on the machine, simply because of the denotions of how much you can move this bed. Oh, that's a little tight. A little bit there. So every time it gets a little too tight, I just back off by the same amount and then go to the next button in until I start to feel that tension. So here's our tension. It's actually it's a little tight right there. There we go. That's a good place. Enough so you can push it, like the paper crinkles a little bit, but you can still push it. So, say okay on that. Okay, so it says please remove paper and wait for the bed probing to begin. So say okay. In this part of the process, it's actually going to do 100-point calibration of our bed. So we're actually going to see where our bed actually is. So we have to make one change first, and we have to jump back to the computer to actually make this change. So the note on the screen, it says copy the reported height value on the G-code console and paste it into the config.g file. So if I click on OK, I close out of our macros menu and I hit the button at the bottom that says console. On the console there's a message, and in my case it states stopped height at height 1.028 millimeter. This is going to be the number that we have to paste into our config.g file. So in a moment we'll jump over to our computer and I'll show you exactly where that's done. Alright, so here on our laptop we are going to jump over to our Big 40 web interface. We click down the left side, go to System. You will see the config.g file. When you click on it, it will open. If you scroll down through this file, you will see a section here that starts Z-probe. In the line that begins with G31. Okay, once we've scrolled down, our default value is -3. We want to simply replace this with 1.028 in my case. Your number will be different, but you want to put in here whatever number was taken directly off the console of the machine. Do not leave a space between the Z and the 1. You just want to type it in exactly as you see here. The upper right corner, click on Save. It will prompt you, tell you you have to reset the board in order to read the new configuration. State yes. Machine will reboot, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, so finally at this point, we have our rough probe adjustment, we have our tilt calibration done, we have our Z offset set up. Close, won't be perfect. You will need to do a final baby step when you start doing your first prints. The last step in this process is we're actually going to build what they call the heightmap.csv file. So in order to do that, we're basically going to start the modex with doing a 100-point calibration completely across this bed. When you start this process, go into the macros button on your screen. In the macros button, you're going to go to bed compensation. It states to you, auto bed compensation. Press OK to probe the bed and activate compensation. The height map is stored in the sysheightmap.csv file. This is in the process of building this file. So once it starts, don't stop it, just let it go. Click on OK. It will home, and then you will see it start to do the probe. So we're gonna let this complete, and when we come back, we'll start doing some first prints. Hey guys, I have been printing a lot. For those of you that have been in 3D printing for a while, you may remember the Wade's gear type extruder. Remember the printed part? You used to be able to get 3-to-1 gear reduction. A lot of the, say, E3Ds, you know, kind of based on that gear reduction. Well, the cheap man's version was the Wade's extruder. When you take a Wade's extruder gear and you blow it up 400%, that's what you get. It takes about 8 hours to print this. Now, as much fun as this is, I have to be honest with you, this was not nearly as much fun as printing the other half of the 3-to-1 gear reduction. All told, there's about 26 hours worth of print time in here. The Modex does it extremely well. I have to be honest with you. These prints came out, I won't say absolutely flawlessly, but I will say that what flaws there are in it are negligible. And probably not, well, I'll actually say for sure, they're not the printer's fault. We get, as you can imagine, 3D Printing Canada, one of the largest film distributors and retailers in Canada. We get a lot of random rolls of filament. This print here alone took almost 1 kilo of filament. So I was finding all kinds of things to print just to use up filament. So we were using using up a lot of our tester filaments on these. So a couple of little small defects in it. I would hazard to guess that it's probably filament related. I have also done a lot of prints off this Modex for me. But yeah, I kind of feel like I'm a little bit of Joel on this one. So, hey Joel, if you're watching this, anything that you could normally print, it's always fun to print it bigger. So that being said, and a little bit along the lines of filament experimentation, I had a filament came in that was called frosted glass. I'll be honest with you, it's cool. It really does look neat. And this was supposed to be a tea light holder. So you can imagine how much I had to blow this up to actually make it work. I can't remember the number off Thingiverse that I used for this, but that's actually what it's described as a tea light holder. This was supposed to be about that big. I think this one here is a 600% blow up, and then it was a little too big, so I actually took the whole print and just went squish, just to let you have a look and see what the volume that printer can do. I have to say I'm very impressed with the machine. I kind of wanted to bring it back up here in our film studio right now. I built it here. A couple of us moved it downstairs to where I was actually printing with it for the last couple of weeks. We weren't bringing it back up, not just for video. So that being said, we left the printer downstairs. We just brought up the prints, and I have to say the print quality is absolutely astounding. I started playing around with things that would be difficult for this printer to print, and I figured, what's about the hardest thing I can think of with the most number of retractions and the tallest thing that I could come up with. I took this scale of the Eiffel Tower, the actual full-size print time on it would actually have filled the big would have filled the big 40. The print time on that, if I had printed this at 100% scale, would have been 8 days. And needed, I think, almost 5 kilos of filament to be able to print it. So I decided to take it and scale it down. I scaled it down to, I think, 40% was this one here. I got it off the print bed, took it outside, and first thing I did was knock the top off it because I hit it on the frame on the Modex. Again, completely my fault. And I was like, well, that's not good. So I think I was going to print it again. This time I did it at about 50% of scale. But it kind of gives you an idea that you can keep getting bigger. If I was to print it at full size, it would be about this high. The print quality, again, I would have the scattered, you know, filament that would come out and get tangled up in the roll, would get jammed in the extruder. It's no more difficult to deal with this machine or to do quick repairs on it as what it is with any other 3D printer that you have. If I had a spool with a bad knot in it, I caught it early enough, I could simply clear the hot end, hit pause on it, clear the hot end, clear the knot, put it back in, and it would keep going. I'm actually really impressed with this. The machine itself is power stable. The temperatures and the extrusion and quality you're going to get out of it are predictable. The big thing with bigger printers is the bigger the prints, the more time it's also going to take to put together. You guys have been looking at this video, and I realize at this point you've probably been watching it for a couple of hours. That was almost 2 weeks of build time into that machine, between other things that I had to do here in the store and getting our camera crew together and getting the videos and that done. There was about 2 weeks worth of time that was into building that machine. Bear in mind that it was probably a little slower than what it would be for somebody who can be dedicated at it, but don't expect that you're going to be able to get this machine, put it together, and be printing on it, you know, in 2 or 3 days. It's going to be a long process. You have to be careful with it. Follow the instructions online. Use the proper size bolts where you need to use them. If something doesn't work quite right, reach out to Modex and their support guys. They are great. I've emailed them through the build process of the few Modixes that I've built. Reached out to them a couple of times. I'll usually send them an email. I leave here, come in the morning, I've got a response, and the response is bang on. If I have a little issue, I take it, do my tweak, do my fix, and move on. So in the grand scheme of things, I will be honest with you, if you're looking for a large format machine that's stable, reliable, fully enclosed, you can do anything from PLA, TPU, straight up to ABS. They do have the PT100 upgrades in it where you can start getting into 300, 400, and 500 degree filaments. HIPS, PETG, nylon, well, HIPS, nylon, carbon fiber. I personally haven't gotten into those. We don't have the upgrades like those in our machines. I'm just using it as standard as I can, as standard as what 90% of the client base will buy it as. If you're going to start getting into those high temperature nozzles, you know what you're getting into before you get into it. So the recommendation is if you're looking for a platform to start from, this would definitely be a good one for you to go with. So I thank you very much for your time, guys. I have had a lot of fun doing this video. I do spend a fair bit of time building these Modex, but doing this one with the cameras and showing you guys some of the little tricks and tweaks that I have to go through when we're putting these machines together, it's been fun. And I very much appreciate your time. Don't forget, like and subscribe on the video. Come back and check out our other videos that we do have. On our video channel, we do have them that goes all the way from the Ender 3 build videos right up to some more advanced tweaking and configuration of your home personal machines. But we do really appreciate it. Thank you very much and have a great day.